Hello and welcome to episode 13. At the onset, I would like to thank all of you for watching our videos and for encouraging us through your generous comments and messages. Please continue to support us, and I promise you quality content in the coming days as well. Now, to talk about today's review, today we are going to review Pulitzer Prize winning Sylvia Plath's book. It's a very well-known work, The Bell Jar. It's also one of my favorites of all time. To talk about the plot, this is the story of a young woman named Esther who wins an internship to be a guest editor at a fashion magazine in New York for the period of 1 month. And this is an envious position to be in, with all the gifts and facilities that are being showered upon the girl interns. But Esther simply cannot be happy. She does not find the glamour in New York to be very charming. It is something that stifles her, and she simply cannot be cheerful in that environment. She believes it all to be sham. And after she returns, she learns that her plan to pursue a writing course for the rest of her summer has been quashed because her application for the same has been rejected. Her mother tells her about this. So she makes vague plans of writing a novel or completing her thesis or pursuing a course in shorthand, but she does none of those. She's not able to do anything. She finds that she's majorly depressed, and for days she does not bathe or change or sleep even, and her mother coaxes her into seeing a psychiatrist who's a really insensitive fellow. And after a couple of sittings wherein there is no result, he suggests shock therapy to her, and she undergoes this shock treatment, and she turns out to be miserable after that. She attempts to take her own life. She swallows a lot of sleeping pills and slits her thigh even, and later she is hospitalized, and within the hospital she is really cold, and she does not cooperate, and she's also paranoid, and she's obsessed with the idea of suicide, and she's at the height of her depression. But then one of her old benefactresses, Philomena Guinea, a lady who's a very famous novelist and who had initially sponsored her scholarship to college, she steps in and she pays to move her to a private hospital. Now this is a better environment. Esther likes this environment simply because she can walk about, and she also likes her new psychiatrist who is a feminist and who is very open-minded, and she's given a kind of a combination therapy where they counsel her and give her insulin and do the shock therapy in a better way, and she emerges to be better. Her condition improves. She's also allowed to move out of the hospital, and she indulges in a few adventures that are empowering for her. Also, many other things in her life gain closure, which is, which ends up making her happier than before. And now she's all set to leave the hospital and enter her winter semester in college. But she realizes that she was under a bell jar, a thin glass jar that had stifled her for a moment and stifled her for some time, and she believes that this is something that may descend again upon her. Now, moving on to the setting, this book is set in Boston, New York and Massachusetts. Like I told you before, New York is the place where she interns, and Boston suburbs is where she comes from, and Massachusetts is where her home at the present is, and where she moves to after her internship. So she dwells in a very stifling, in a very suppressing environment. She's simply not able to come to terms with the role that is expected of her. She feels a strong sense of alienation as a woman from the society. She believes that she does not fit into the role that the society expects of her. Her home environment is really callous. Although her mother, she tries to be really tender and kind to her, but she invokes a lot of guilt within her. Her neighborhood is something disgusting to her because she constantly views a lady who has a lot of children, and she's producing baby after baby, and she gets disgusted because of that. Then the men around her are also very insensitive. She does not like them because they expect her to be tender and cheerful all the time, and they entertain double standards of male and female sexuality. And then the hospitals that she visits, she finds these to be really they have a lot of pressure on her because she believes that the doctors do not empathize with the patients, and particularly with the plight of the women. So this is another thing that disgusts her. Now we'll talk about the characters. So the protagonist is Esther Greenwood. As I mentioned before, she is somebody who's really intelligent and witty, and she's an A grader all throughout. But at the same time, she's also a person who is very insecure and very uncomfortable with her environment. She is obsessed with the idea of suicide. She feels really stifled, and questions of identity perpetually haunt her, and she believes that she's under a bell jar that stifles her momentarily. And this bell jar is something which is her own head actually, which is full of a sense of insecurity and unrealistic assumptions. Then there is a mother, Mrs. Greenwood, who is a very simple woman and who's had a very difficult life. She's suffered many hardships simply because her husband passed away when her children were still young. So she makes a living, teaching typing and shorthand. She's kind to her children, but she fails to understand Esther. And although, like I said before, she tries to be tender to her, but her tenderness in turn is really callous to a mentally upset Esther. Then there is a guy named Buddy Willard, who is a friend of Esther's at college, and he's a really handsome fellow, very well placed in society, having studied from Yale and having pursued a medical course. And he's somebody who desires Esther and wants her in his life, and he's approved of by everybody, including the protagonist's mother. But Esther does not like him. She is disgusted by his conventional thinking. His idea of womanhood is simply to do with socially accepted responsibilities, curtailed desires, and a lack of personality. He's not able to understand why Esther wants to become a writer and not a mother and a wife. And he has no care for Esther's love for poetry. He is very insensitive in that way, and he just expects her to be soft and tender and homely. Also, his idea that a woman ought to be a virgin until she gets married, while he himself indulges in a lot of adventures that he owns to, is something that makes him a hypocrite in front of Esther. Then there is Dr. Nolan, Esther's psychiatrist, who she really likes because she is a feminist. She's very open-minded and progressive. Then there is her old doctor, Dr. Gordon, who is insensitive and lacks empathy. Also, there is JC, who is her boss at the fashion magazine. She's very business-like, but she's also very kind to Esther. Then Esther makes two friends at the magazine studio where she's interning at. One is Doreen, who's very rebellious and beautiful, and the other is Betsy, who's very moral. And initially, Esther is drawn to Doreen because both of them are cynical in a way, and later she realizes she's more like Betsy and she tells more to her. Then there is a bunch of guys in the book as well who leave different impression on Esther's mind and who impact her life and contribute to her state in a good and bad way. Now we will move on to the themes that pervade the text. As all of you would have already surmised, the primary theme in the book is that of mental health. So now the idea of suicide is not very deeply analyzed in the book, but the text is more like an account of the person who contemplates suicide, who is mentally, who is massively depressed and who is thinking about dying. So in a way, the protagonist is complaining about the lack of empathy in the society, particularly in doctors. They do not care about the patient's mindset. They just simply see them as animals that they are meant to treat. And also about the near and dear ones of the people who are suffering mentally. They try to be really kind to them, but in a way they accuse these people. So what Sylvia Plath through this book is trying to say is that depression is like a bell jar that descends upon a person to stifle them for some time, and it's something that cannot be helped. It is like the weather, and nobody intentionally gets into this state, and people cannot explain why they are like that. Another theme that the book caters to is that of feminism. Now, women's roles during Sylvia Plath's time were really conventional, and even women who wanted to work had very limited options. They could be typists and nurses and teachers and stuff like that. And there weren't very emancipated role models available for common women. And women were simply expected to do a lot of chores and be very homely and tender and soft. But Sylvia Plath, Esther is more like Sylvia Plath, the writer, and she disagrees and she rejects this suppression and this humiliation of being a woman and succumbing to these kind of roles. She detests the idea of acting as a slave to men, and she believes that dying is more dignified than submitting to people in this way. Now moving on to why this book is relevant, like I've already highlighted how this book is really dark and frightening, so certainly it is not meant for people who tend to be gloomy. But then this is not a book to be enjoyed. This is more like an education that we all need. My point is that most of us are vulnerable in one or the other way, and there's a lot happening to spur our anxieties every day. So because of that, we need to read about mental health, and this is one book that is going to give you insight into that. For one, this book is going to tell you that you are not alone and that it is okay to feel that way, and it is okay not to know where you're headed to. And it will also tell you that empathy is the thing that is going to lift this bell jar from your heads. So with this, I would like to say that I strongly recommend this book to all of you. Also, let me know in the comment section how you found this book. Signing off, Geetika Kohli Amla at The Dispatch.